course, we want to address student discipline, and we want to look at the infractions with the greatest increase over last year, and we also want to take some time to look at the next steps that we are taking to respond to the behaviors that we are seeing from our students. In addition, we want to turn the conversation and talk about school safety as well, current measures that we have in place for our schools to be safe, as well as future considerations that we are looking at. And we would like your feedback during this time on how we can improve our safety efforts during this discussion time at the end of the presentation. So I want to ensure that we are on the same page, and I want to equip us with 3 key terms that we need to ensure that we're on the same page with to better understand what our student discipline data or information may be telling us. If we look at the term student, it's truly a unique count of students with the discipline incident. In other words, some of our data gets reported by students. If we look at incidents, that takes a look at the number of incidents recorded as an office discipline referral or an ODR. We can also look at this data through the lens of a rule violation, which is the number of rules violated by students. And to better illustrate how these terms work together, we're going to walk through this student behavior scenario. So this scenario calls for, let's say, school A, that a fight occurred between 3 students. And as you know, in our code of conduct, a fight is a 5 VB. That's a level 3, 4, or 5. And during the fight, one of the students would use profanity. And so here in this scenario, we see that by reporting by incident, we have 1 incident. If we report this by students, it involves 3 students. But if reported by rule violation, it would be 4 rule violations. 3 students involved in the fight, and one of the students actually using profanity, which is 5AF. So as you know, and we know, we've heard concerns from schools, from our community, about school safety as well as discipline. And we want to show a very transparent contrast between last year this time, August 1st through October 30th, to this year this time. And we pulled out the rule infractions that we feel like we have heard the most about, Rule 5s, Rule 6, and Rule 7. Now, data are just numbers unless we can turn those numbers into contextual information. And so although these are the top 3 for each major rule violation displayed at the end of October, this does not mean that these are the most frequent violated rules this year.
Mr. Thigpen, I don't mean to interrupt, but what about AWOLs and absences?
Yes, ma'am. If you'll give me a chance to get through the presentation, I'll be happy to get back to your question about AWOLs and absences. So I'm going to make a note for you, and please remind me to get back there. So again, this does not mean these rules are the most frequently violated. These violations have we've seen the most increase from last year to this year, this time. And so we're looking again at this from August 1 to October 31, and we're looking at this been sorted by the number of students. I want to bring to your attention in Rule 6, you see there are actually 4 versus 3 in the others. There's an asterisk there. Toy gun is one that actually made the top 3, but we know there's been a lot of questions in our community centered around handguns, so we want to be very transparent and bring that data to you as well. So to make meaning of these numbers, we want to start with incidents, the column in the middle. Then we want to look at how many students were involved, and then we want to finally look at the number of rules that were actually violated. Now, you may see some differences here that may ask questions or bring questions to mind. If we have more incidents than students, then that means students violated the rules more than once. If we have more students than incidents, then that means that more than one student was involved in an incident. And if we have more rule violations than incidents or students, that means that multiple rules were violated per incident or student. So again, these are just major rule violations, and you see that for Rule 5 here. And I want to call to our attention 5BB. And so you'll see for the 21-22 school year, we had 473 incidents of fights that involved 724 students for a total of 750 rule violations. In comparison to this year, you do see an increase to 638 incidents of fighting involving 947 students and 991 rule violations. Remember the scenario that we just walked you through. One fight will involve at least 2 students and at least 2 rule violations. That being said, you could have one student violate the rule of fighting more than one time. 5BZ, you may ask, what is that? The other physical student physical? That's where we have the majority of our non-confrontational contracts drawn up with our students to ensure that they are not having physical contact with our students. Rule 6, just make a note for me. Yes, ma'am. Rule 6 violations, again, this is the ones that a lot of questioning about. This is centered around weapons. And the most frequent or the highly increased rules from last year to this year at the same time, again, we said that 6C was not included in that, but we wanted to include that for transparency. And so let's go down to 6C handgun, and you'll see that there were 5 incidents of guns in our schools this year so far, involving 6 students, which means there was one incident of a gun where 2 students touched the same gun. Also, there were 6 rule violations associated with those 6 students. In comparison to last year, we had seen 2 at this time of the school year. Rule 7 violations is drugs and alcohol. Again, I would like to bring our attention to 7AF, and we're going to start in the center column for these major rule violations for Rule 7. Incidents, and if we look at the school year of 21-22, we'll see there were 198 incidents that involved 228 students for a total of 240 rule violations. Again, we see an uptick here. 305 incidents for this year involving 326 students and 343 rule violations. So we know that our student behavior data
Quick question. Did you all look at the data prior to 2021, 2022? I'm curious. It would be great to be able to see a little bit more trends around that. I know we were coming from a pandemic, and just curious if you can share a little bit about that.
Yes, ma'am, I do have that. It's not in the presentation, so I may be able to pull some of that out for you. We have trend data all the way back 5, 6 years that we've looked at for this. If we don't get directly to it, we can obviously give that to you as well. So thank you for the question. But we know that our student behavior data is telling us that we need to shift our response to the needs of the behavior that is being displayed by our students. So I'm going to share with you how we are shifting our response based on that data from last year to this year, and not just around student behavior, but also around school safety. So Dr. Watts has been highly engaged in this work with us. As a matter of fact, he met with all principals about their concerns. He also sent an email to principals and staff regarding course corrections of how we were going to course correct and how we're managing student behaviors in our school district. As a result, in front of you, as we look at ensuring that our schools are safe, secure, and successful, these are the steps that we're going to take in response to the behaviors that we are seeing. We want to continue to make sure that we communicate high expectations for each and every student regarding behavioral expectations in our schools. We want to also ensure that we are empowering principals to keep our schools safe. Those leaders of our buildings that know what's best for their schools, supporting teachers in the classroom, keeping the focus on teaching and learning, ensuring that it's the right climate and the right culture so that every student and staff member feels safe in their school. We also are articulating clearly anything that is dangerous, illegal, or significantly disruptive very well may lead to a tribunal process. Just let me give you an example there. If a student brings a gun, I just want to be clear, that would be a violation not only of our code of conduct, but it would also be a violation of Georgia law. Those students who would violate that in such a way would stand subject to not only being arrested, but also going to a tribunal. Fights is something that we're seeing a lot of rise in as well, as we stated earlier. And this is more of a complex issue because it could be a level 3, a level 4, or a level 5 violation, depending on the severity of the fight and how much disruption and chaos it caused in the school. So if it was a fight with maybe 2 people in isolation, chances are that wouldn't rise to the level of us looking at it like a level 5 violation. However, conversely, if there was a fight with 2 students, and next thing you know, and this happens in our schools, other students get involved in it in the commons area, in a very common space, and now it's disrupted our lunch environment. Students can't get through to get their lunch. You have students that may be standing on tables or even with their cell phones and videoing it, and now we have a true school disruption as a result of that fight, and students get hurt and injured. That very well may be a level 5, and it may be consideration for a tribunal.
Mr. Thigpen, can I have multiple level 3 fights and just keep hanging out at school?
We utilize progressive discipline, and so if a student is engaged in violent behavior that continues to escalate, our response to that would escalate as well.
Well, my behavior didn't escalate.
The frequency of the behavior escalates.
Okay.
So that's the question. If the
Right.
frequency does escalate, we would have to escalate our consequences as well, because what the behavior would be showing us is that the response that we utilized did not work. And so we would have to obviously tease that out. And when I say escalate our responses, could be that it's more severe in terms of discipline, but it also could mean that we need to intervene at a different level because the behavior may be communicating something different to us.
This is a great question that Vice Chair Knudsen had. If you could elaborate on, because I think there was like some, with reference to the violations and understanding, because I think that right there, what you just honed in on, that it's not, my understanding is, it's not that you have, if you get into one fight, yes, you do get this level of, a violation. You're tied to this level of violation. But because if you had 2, 3, it starts escalating, then we have additional consequence, or you have to revisit what is there. I think there was some confusion around that, and just at understanding, if you could kind of give more examples as to where it's not as if we're taking away consequences or not adhering to violations or breaking the law or just throwing our hands up in the air saying you don't have any consequences or anything. I think there is some confusion, though, in and around things where it comes to fights and just understanding, yes, we have certain levels, and this is how we manage through that.
Yeah, if I could answer like this, and then I'll respectfully ask if we can hold the questions to the end so we can get through the presentation after that. Our administrators, our principals have been trained, and they know our code of conduct well. And as they are able to exercise due process in looking at a discipline incident, not only are they looking at that particular incident, but they're also looking at history of a said student. and how they have responded, not just the student, but how the school has responded as well. And so our principals, our administrators are going to do what they need to do to keep our schools safe within the confines of our code of conduct. And if it rises to a level 5 with a rule violation of fighting, then they would apply consequences accordingly. And so we trust our principals. They have been adequately trained. They are seasoned professionals with that, and we know that they need to be supported when making decisions to keep their schools safe. We are also partnering with law enforcement and our district's attorney, local law enforcement, and our district attorney's office to keep guns and weapons off of our campus, and we're very happy that we have great relationships with our local law enforcement as well as Madam District Attorney Patsy Alston-Gatson. We also looking at utilizing proactive as well as reentry interventions. Proactive, ensuring that we can address the behaviors on the front end to prevent things from happening. But if indeed the behavior presents itself in such a way that we have to have a disciplinary response and there's a separation of the student from the school, then upon the reentry, we will intervene to address the behavior as well. And then, that's through a multi-tiered system of interventions. And we are building not just the skill for our staff and our teachers in addressing those, but also we're addressing the skill for our students. We're teaching behavioral expectations through our social emotional learning. And we are really taking a strong look at that as well through a discipline task force that we're looking to launch in the very near future. And this will be made up of stakeholders, of principals, assistant principals, counselors, teachers, staff, parents, students, as well as community leaders to help us really identify what they are seeing boots on the grounds in terms of concerns with our current state of discipline and how we can better respond accordingly. And we'll continue to keep you as well as others updated through monitoring our data with our quarterly board reports.